Thank you for coming. I appreciate y'all being here. If you don't know me, I'm Monica Gresser with Brazen Architecture. Started BRAZENconversations. We had our first discussion back in November. We discussed homeless. We discussed homeless in general, and that's my mood music. Thank you. And so this month we're going to discuss, or today we're going to discuss homeless youth. Why they're there, how they get there, and then try to have a little discussion about what people are doing to get kids off the street, or what you can do to help if that's what you want to do. Just a variety of topics kind of thrown into this one, or a variety of things thrown into this one topic. So today, homeless youth and Arash from Nevada Partnership for Homeless Youth. Are you just assisting Melissa?
Oh, yeah, me and Vince, I think, are just
Vincent, all from Nevada Partnership for Homeless Youth, are going to lead our discussion, and it really is a discussion. So a really quick bit of information about what they do or what we're going to be doing, what the topic is, and then there should be back and forth dialogue among everybody. We shouldn't just be listening to Arash talk all night. It should be it should be a conversation with everyone, because that way we get a little bit more out of it when we do that. So if you will, please.
Yeah, great. Yes, thank you for that kind introduction. My name is Arash, and I'm with Nevada Partnership for Homeless Youth. And I have here Melissa, who's our research and development manager there, and Vincent Pollard, who's our outreach manager there. And first off, thank you to Monica and for the concept of BRAZENconversations. I think it's really important for the community to engage in dialogue around very important issues that affect us and that are plaguing our community. And the first session was great. It was about homelessness in general, and I think that piqued some interest with Monica and others, and we dived into the issues more. And through that, youth homelessness is one of the biggest problems we have with homelessness here in our community in general. And Monica and BRAZENconversations thought it'd be great if we could talk about it. So here we are. And just a really quick bit of background. I used to be in the private sector, and I've been working with homeless youth for about 5 years, and then with youth issues in general for just under a decade. And I guess my passion lies why I'm here is because I'm really interested in the intersection between business, community, and policy. And the issue of youth homelessness really touches all that. It is a business case issue, it is a policy issue, and it is a community issue for all of us. So regardless of where you are, what sector you're in, what you do, it's a very important issue to all of us that has potentially generational consequences. So with that, let's jump right into it. So I want to quickly talk about the extent of the problem. Youth homelessness is a serious and growing problem here in Southern Nevada. And just a quick question for somebody in the audience is, does anyone guess where Nevada ranks in terms of the population of homeless youth compared to other states?
Probably top 10.
That's a good guess. Anyone else want to guess? It's actually fourth in the nation for the prevalence of homeless youth. However, we lead the nation. We're number one in a horrible way for having the highest rate of those homeless youth that live unsheltered, meaning that the community does not have nearly enough resources to support the problem that we have compared to other communities. And in addition to that, you guys may have saw the flyer or through the Facebook invite, but there are a little over 11,000 homeless youth enrolled in the Clark County School District. What's really shocking about that is that just in 3-4 years ago, that number in the school district was just shy of 6,000. So it's almost doubled in that short time. So it is a very growing and serious problem in our community. Quickly, I want to talk about some of the causes. Why are youth homeless? We spent a lot of time talking about this, so I just want to give you a couple of things to think about really quick. The causes include severe family breakdown, running away from abuse and neglect, being kicked out by their families. And abuse and neglect can take a lot of forms, by the way. It's sexual abuse, physical abuse, mental abuse, or a combination of all of it. Being kicked out of their families for a lot of different issues. But a growing subset of the youth that are getting kicked out of their homes are because of LGBTQ reasons that are getting kicked out of their homes. Also, kids fall through the cracks of the traditional child welfare systems. they're destined families that leave youth with nowhere to go and nowhere to turn. And there's a variety of other economic, social, and cultural factors that contribute to that. But the reality of our community is that our social service systems here are not adequately equipped to deal with this problem and the scope of it. So what are some of the consequences for these homeless youth? Homeless youth are more likely than their peers to suffer from substance abuse, chronic mental and physical health problems, unwanted pregnancy, crime, victimization, gang involvement, dropping out of high school, and even worse, becoming homeless adults, perpetuating that cycle of chronic homelessness generationally perhaps. So let's frame these consequences really quick. They sound dire, but what do they mean, quantitatively? Just to give you a couple examples. 1 out of every 3 teens on the streets will be lured into prostitution within 48 hours of becoming homeless. And over a third of homeless youth engage in survival sex. And survival sex is trading your body for survival essentials like food or shelter or other things. So that's a pretty shocking fact. And then homeless youth are more likely to be diagnosed with HIV and die from AIDS as opposed to the general youth population. So question, does anyone want to guess how many times more likely a homeless youth is to contract HIV as opposed to their peers? How many times more likely?
Probably 75% more likely.
Actually, percentage-wise, 1,600% more likely. They're 16 times more likely to contract HIV, and I believe it's 7 times more likely to die from AIDS.
I have a question real quick. When you say homeless youth, how do you actually define them? Because I know there are actual homeless families that have youth in them.
Mm-hmm.
Are you talking about youth that are entirely on their own or part of a family unit? Because they kind of...
Well, what I would say is when we speak, there is a very broad definition in terms of it. As it pertains to that statistic, I would say kids who are actually on the streets. Because once you hit that level of being homeless, then you're more likely to engage in survival sex.
So they're on their own. And homeless is one being on their
Yeah,
own.
I would say as it relates specifically to that statistic.
Okay.
Because yes, when there's still family or you're couch surfing or whatever, the risk factors are different. But as it pertains to being on the streets.
And also, I mean, obviously both situations are awful and include many risk factors. And for that statistic about homeless youth in the school district includes youth who are homeless with their families. So we have tons of homeless families in our community and tons of youth who are a part of those families. But our community really has an extreme problem with unaccompanied homeless youth who you're referring to, youth totally on their own who are homeless. And that's the kind of statistics about that we're fourth in the nation and first in the nation for those are all just youth completely on their own. And a lot of these risk factors are really pronounced when we're talking about unaccompanied youth completely on their own without their
Okay,
family.
so the 11,000, the number that you quoted, is that youth on their own, or is that?
No, that's homeless.
Total of homeless
That's
in the
homeless
school district?
overall, right.
Oh, for the whole school
Alright.
district, homeless at all.
You had
And
me
those
worried
could
there, I was like,
technically-
holy crow, if that's what it is, that's a lot more than I thought.
It is, and that technically does include some unaccompanied youth though as well.
Okay.
Does that also include at risk of homelessness?
No, that statistic is,
That's a
well,
different
it's using the McKinney-Vento definition of youth
Okay.
homeless, which is what the school district uses, which is kind of a broader definition of youth homelessness. So it includes street homeless, squatters, all of that, but it also includes couch surfers, youth who are doubled up, youth who are living in daily weeklies, including with their families, youth who really just don't have a stable nighttime residence that they can count on.
And in terms of unaccompanied homeless youth, it's estimated that on a given day in the country here in Southern Nevada, there's a little over 2,200 unaccompanied homeless youth on the streets on any given day. And then one more thing, does anyone want to guess what percentage of homeless youth nationwide are LGBTQ?
What?
Who said that? You've been reading.
No, I'm just good with numbers.
That's good. Okay. It is estimated that up to approximately 40% are LGBTQ. So that can really kind of help at least frame up some things for us. So you may be wondering why I have this backpack here with me. So this backpack here is going to be part of our exercise. It's called What's in the Backpack. And I want you all to think back real quick. If you can recollect what you had in your backpacks in high school. What were some of the items that you had in your backpack?
Arash, real quick, can we talk about quickly what's the difference between a homeless child and a homeless adult? Because that also is the difference between what a homeless adult is going to have with them and what a homeless child has with them, right?
Yeah, I think that's what the exercise is gonna.
Okay, we'll get that from there?
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely, and I was definitely right back on,
Okay.
absolutely. With the backpack, what were some of the typical items that you would, as a teenager, have in your backpack when you were in school?
Pens, calculators, paper, books.
Combs.
Ooh, mirrors and makeup, because you know, just lots of lip gloss.
Ask the teenager.
So, yeah, what do you put in your backpack nowadays? Nowadays. Great.
Same stuff.
Same stuff, I don't think it's changed much, maybe tracking computers became computers and iPads and things like that. Yeah, so it's some sort of the same items. Well, as we said before, there's thousands of homeless youth here in our community, and many of them carry around a backpack, but it's not filled with the same sort of supplies that you would typically think, like carrying around school supplies or something like that. This backpack can sometimes be their most, contains their most valuable possessions, and everything they have with them is often on their back. And that is their holier belongings that they care about. So, I guess what we're going to do now is that we'll go through this backpack, and I'm going to pass it this way to you. And if you could just take one item out, show it to the group. We're going to discuss that item, and then we'll keep that item and pass it back to your own. It's a wallet. You'll forgive me, this is the first time we've ever done this cool little this exercise. So what a wallet represents for homeless youth homelessness can often happen suddenly and unpredictably. So when you're a youth, it's very different from adult homelessness. When you're an adult and experiencing homelessness, there's a downward cycle, there's external or internal shock to your ability to sustain yourself, to keep surviving, keep paying rent, whatever. There's a downward cycle, you can end up homelessness. With youth could wake up and go to school and their lives be absolutely fine, and they come home and their life is turned upside down and they are homeless. It can happen suddenly, it can happen unpredictably for all these youth. So could you open up the wallet and maybe look at some of the contents? So, small photo, yes. So, what this represents is when youth have to leave their homes or are tossed aside or are escaping abuse where they would rather spend the nights in cold, hard, dark streets as opposed to whatever abusive environment, or if they're asked to leave, or whatever the circumstance may be. Even though they may be leaving abusers or running away from abusers, there may have been other things in that life that were very intimate to them, things that they held very near and dear that they no longer have access to. It could have been a pet, it could have been part of their house, certain possessions, or it could have been younger siblings even. And that represents a younger sibling that had to stay in that home environment that they're either running away or backing out. And then what else is in the wallet?
$1 and 7 pence.
7. There's so should be 8. No, I'm kidding. So money equals resources for many of us, and this is something that many youth are lacking. So youth don't have income typically. Youth don't have typically a large amount of savings, and they're constantly struggling to have money for very simple things, like maybe a bus pass, maybe a meal, or another simple need. So the fact that they're very resource efficient in terms of money also means that they don't have access to very simple survival things that they may need. And then the other thing that wallet represents is what's missing in that wallet.
ID.
ID, exactly. So it's a huge barrier that these youth encounter. If you think about it, since youth homelessness happens suddenly and unpredictably, they're not like leaving their houses or being given their identity information before they're asked to leave or getting tossed out or when they run away. And this represents a huge barrier. Without this ID, they can't identify themselves. They can't prove their age. They can't go try to get a job, and they cannot access many mainstream benefits in our community without this ID. And the reality is if you're under the age of 18, you cannot go get an ID or your birth certificate or other identification documents without parental or guardian consent. So this creates a huge problem for these youth that can prevent them from doing very, very simple things that can help their situation. So, yeah, with that, what's next? Michael. You can open up the big one if you want. Okay. You can explore around.
It's like black, I don't know, it's a coat.
It's blanket.
It's a blanket? Yeah, it's a blanket.
Or a coat, or a lot of different things. So this represents a life survival item for homeless youth. This is a very important item for youth. If you think about youth that are homeless, they often have to sleep on streets, rooftops, many places that are not meant for human habitation, like school bleachers, tunnels, etc. Imagine the harsh weather that we deal with in this community. We go from hot to cold in a matter of hours. Sometimes in the morning, it's really cold, and we have to use a heater. Then by lunch, it's really hot, and then we go back to using a heater when we're driving home or something like that. That's how harsh and severe our climate can be. And for these youth, this blanket can often mean not freezing to death. It can mean having relief from weather conditions. And even more so, it can be used as a tool to make sleeping a little more comfortable. Imagine what it is like to sleep on a street on a cold piece of concrete. Putting that blanket underneath you really can provide that little bit of comfort that makes somewhat of a difference when you're out there in those cold, hard, dark streets. And then some youth aren't directly on the streets. Sometimes they're couch surfing. Sometimes they go from one place to another place, and every day that can be different if they're lucky enough to find another place to go to. But even then, if they don't know where they're going to go, but they're lucky enough to end up on a couch or another place, they don't know what resources are there. They don't know what's available to them there. So they have to have everything with them to feel that they have what they need, because they can't rely on anything or any environment, even if they are couch surfing. Next slide.
Oh. Toilet paper.
Toilet paper. All right. Well, I won't spend too much time on toilet paper, but I just want to illustrate that something as simple as going to the bathroom, for us, can be a challenge for these youth and the homeless population. But for youth, it is a struggle. If you think about it, many places where they go, they're accused of loitering or trespassing, or if they're out at night, many places are locked where they don't have access to it. Youth often are victims of youth are often victimized on the streets as well. So they're often hiding and not near very popular areas, which means that they're not close to a bathroom facility, which means that they really have to carry everything they need to be able to do something as simple as go to the bathroom. They have no guarantee when that is going to happen to them. Are these some of the same things you have?
Not quite.
Socks. So, believe it or not, socks are one of the most requested items by homeless youth on the streets. If you think about it, homeless youth do not have a lot of clothes, often what's in their back, or they don't have stable access to transportation, or any access to transportation. So, imagine how it feels to have to wear the same pair of socks day in and day out for weeks at a time, often just with some shoes that are full of holes and the soles grinding through. Imagine what it's like to have those same pair of socks on. And youth often sleep in their shoes and socks as well. So they're day in and day out walking on the same pair of socks for sometimes weeks. And if you can imagine how awful that can feel to have to do that, and imagine what it would be like to be able to give one pair of socks with 8 different things so that you feel again feel somewhat clean. And I believe the street term for the fresh pair of socks is called freshies. So homeless youth out there looking for freshies, and those are socks. Next item.
Steps.
Food.
Food, yes. Well, food is a very important item. The harsh reality is that youth do not have stable access to food. Well, very hungry and often have to make very dire decisions because of that fact. Given that they don't have stable access to food, it's something they're constantly struggling with. Where am I going to be able to get my next meal? And that's not an easy answer for them. And the type of foods that they're eating too aren't foods that we really consider dinner-worthy or meal-worthy, but rather just whatever they can get, non-perishables, things like that. But aside from the fact that they don't have stable access to food, they're often hungry, we got to think about how did they get that food? And unfortunately, that means sometimes stealing from a 7-Eleven because you've gone days without eating and you're hungry and you don't know what to do and you don't know how to access services. So you see somewhere like 7-Eleven or something like that, and you go in there and you take something, you steal something, you take that risk of going to jail or getting in trouble because you are so hungry. Other times, youth have to trade their bodies, as we talked about earlier in the statistic, for something as simple as food. And in fact, I've known several clients who fortunately had to engage in survival sex, many, and one particularly young gentleman had to sell his body to have a Snickers bar. That was his thing. So it's unfortunately a very serious issue. Please remember that about a third of youth engage in survival sex. Certainly youth on the streets. Next item. A lighter. So let's think about the mental health of a homeless youth that's on the streets. So you've already had to run away or get kicked out of an environment that is so harsh or so abusive that you're on the streets now. When you're on the streets, you're constantly at risk of being victimized, and think about what it's like to not know where the next meal is going to come from, where you're going to spend the night. You're in survival mode. And it's a very harsh reality. And you know, these streets at night, they're full of illicit activities, illicit drugs, all kinds of things. But also, homeless youth is constantly struggling, you know, from a mental health perspective with why they're in this situation, self-blame, other factors that can come into that. So youth can very easily succumb to drug abuse because of desperation or out of survival. But another reason why youth may carry lighters is that youth, again, are constantly hungry. They're constantly seeking hunger relief, and they don't have any stable sources. So youth realize, unfortunately, that smoking cigarettes is an effective appetite suppressant. And you can bum a cigarette and you can go a couple more hours and not feel so hungry. So that is why youth, some of the reasons why youth may have a lighter on them. Toiletries, okay. So that kind of looks like what I usually put in my bag when I'm about to get on a plane or something like that, so, you know, sort of dock bag or something like that. However, you got to think about homeless youth don't have they don't have a place, they don't have anywhere to put these things, so they have to carry with them all the time. And then two, how are they going to shower? Where are they going to shower? These are things that homeless youth struggle with. Another important thing to keep in mind is that homeless youth aren't trying to advertise the fact that they're homeless to anyone, but especially their peers. They do not want to be stigmatized or bullied or et cetera, or to be found out that they're homeless. So for them, their personal appearance and hygiene is something that's very important. So unfortunately, how do they take a shower? They have to sneak in sometimes into their school gym before or after hours to take a shower, to hide the fact they're doing that very quickly before school starts. They have to find another area to take a shower. They always have to have everything with them. It's a constant challenge for them to find a place to be able to manage their external appearance, which also contributes to mental health, by the way, how you feel about yourself and how you perceive yourself and how others perceive you from a physical perspective. So this is, again, going to the bathroom, being able to take a shower, these types of things become a challenge for homeless youth. And even something as simple as brushing your teeth. Homeless youth have to do that sometimes in sinks at the school bathroom or at a water fountain park or somewhere else. So they always have to carry things with them. They don't know where they're going to use them or how they're going to access those resources. Next slide.
An application or a flyer for a job?
Yes, it's actually a flyer for recruitment at Taco Bell. So let's think about when youth is out there struggling in the streets. Some may have the self-awareness because they've seen people have jobs. I know that people get usually paid when they have a job. Some have the self-awareness to go, okay, well, let me go get a job, and maybe that's going to help in my situation somehow. Well, the reality is that there's many challenges for them to do something as simple as trying to go get a job. One, the whole concept of dress to impress for a job or something like that. How are they going to do that when they have difficulty in taking a shower, difficulty in maintaining their personal appearance, and not having exactly a change of nice clothes on them to go to the recruitment? Two, transportation. This recruitment fair might be 7, 8 walk this whole way to get there, right? It poses a huge barrier to even trying to get a job. These kids, they become homeless during their most critical formative educational years. They're often not in school, or even if they are in school, they're plagued by so many other things like survival mode, what am I going to do, where am I going to go? They're not really thinking about school so much. And what that creates is they're not really prepared to do things like write a cover letter or have a resume or what that is, which also can be a barrier to getting a job. But even more basic than that, they don't have an address. They don't have an ID. You'll see right there in our flyer, it says you must have 2 forms of identification. Please dress to impress. These are all huge barriers that even the youth has a self-awareness to go, okay, well, I need to get money to get resources so I can somewhat help my situation. These barriers are in their way to accessing the ability to get a job. So, unfortunately, in the absence of being able to go to have a viable opportunity to go get a job, these youth often have to stay on the streets and have to resort to other illicit activity just to survive. Yeah, 2 more items up there.
Alright, and Raj, if I might interject quickly. Yes. Before we even go into what, what that's typically going to be used for, what do you think would an item like that would be used for while you're on the street? Obviously explain what it is.
Well, it's just Swiss Army knife, basically. I can see where he uses for food, open cans. I don't know if she's using that so much, but and I guess tools to make things, and also a knife for cutting things or maybe defense.
You're exactly right. That is a survival and personal defense tool. So homeless youth, they're on the streets, they frequently have to protect themselves and try to hide constant victimization on the streets from homeless adults. Homeless adults frequently victimize homeless youth. Gangs, pimps, drug dealers, rapists, criminals, sex and labor traffickers, and all kinds of other horrible people. And this knife is often the only tool or defense that they have to deter some of that street victimization. In addition to that, though, just like he said, this is a tool for being able to open food, cans of foods, things like that, being able to cut through things. Because again, something as simple as a barrier, not having a way to open a can of food, can leave you hungry for the night. In fact, we even know a story of this one youth who was going to the emergency shelter, and the emergency shelter wasn't really close to them, and they had to walk there to try to get there before its closing time. But this emergency shelter was in a very rural area, and they didn't have a lot of things. So he got 1 can of tuna, and that was in the They left the shelter, which was right around closing time, and they realized that they don't have a tool, they don't have a way to open that can of tuna. And it took them almost 24 hours to figure out a way to open up that can of tuna, so a few of them could split 1 can of tuna. So again, something as simple as a pocket knife has a very different set of uses that we typically would. Maybe want to open a bottle of wine or something like that. This is entirely different from this use. And I think there should be one more thing.
Sure? Is that what it's, yeah?
Yes,
Yeah,
just
okay.
for sure.
Making sure.
So yeah, no, that's not there by accident. So so again, let's think about the mental health and the mentality of homeless youth. So many of these youth are running away or the victims of abuse, neglect, and countless other things in the hands of adults and other institutional figures. So what does that mean? That means that these kids don't really have much trust in adults or institutional figures. So it's not as easy as us being able to say, hey, we're going to help you, come with us. And if we're lucky enough to find that, when you're lucky enough to hear information on how to help themselves, why should they trust that? Why should they trust that when all they've seen is abuse and neglect? And they may be afraid, even if our outreach workers give them that information, they may be afraid that when they get to wherever that is, there may be cops there that they're going to arrest them. There may be people there that take it back to their abusers. They may even be afraid to go back to a group home or another institutional setting that they've already run away from several times because of victimization and other problems. So just because they are lucky enough to even have that information, doesn't mean that they're necessarily going to trust it enough to pursue it. Therefore, we have to really bring some of our services to the streets and establish rapport with the youth on the streets so we can sort of develop a relationship with that now to where they build the confidence or trust to come access further services and perhaps try to get off the streets. So it's not as simple as perhaps just going out there and saying, hey, we got help for you, come with us.
You didn't say this, but one thing
Yeah, so I wanted to talk a little more generally about the issue of homelessness, but Safe Place is actually one of our programs. It's a really cool program. And in fact, we have a person here who manages our Safe Place program.
Yeah.
And
I'll keep it pretty simple. Safe Place is the 24-hour crisis intervention program for youth in our community, for all youth. Any youth who needs help, they can go to the Terrible Hearts, they don't see bus, city fire department, walk in, say I need help, we'll help them out, we'll send somebody out to pick them up. If they're lost, we'll get them home. If they're needing shelter, we'll get them that. It's a fail-safe in the community for all youth.
And what really this allows us to do is to have a footprint essentially at every street corner in the city. So 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, you can access the Safe Place site, and we have Safe Place responders around the clock that are available to pick them up. And depending on what the situation is, get an immediate sense of safety and security. And that's pretty cool that we have such amazing partners that a lot of them are 24/7 locations, so you can always access that, and employees are trained on what to do with them as well. So with that kind of, I think that's the last item in there, besides the backpack itself, which, as you can see, how valuable that backpack is now to the homeless youth that have it. And if you could think about it, what's missing for that backpack?
Anybody?
Clothing, yeah.
All the items that you guys described earlier, school books, notes, pencils, calculators, etc. That's because these youth, when you're 15 and you're in survival mode, meaning you don't know where you're going to sleep, you don't know where your next meal is going to come from, you don't know what your future in 3 hours could be, are you really going to be thinking about school? Are you really going to be thinking about that midterm next week when you don't know where your next meal is going to come from, when you don't know where you're going to sleep that night? And that is why those items are missing from that backpack. And that is the reality that every homeless youth in the community faces. So with that, I just want to kind of start the discussion, I guess, is that the youth that we're dealing with, they don't have a stable place to sleep. They're always thinking about survival. They're always thinking about ways to not get victimized or arrested or get their next meal. And often all they're on with is that backpack to do that. So let's quickly think about 2 other things and we'll start the conversation. 1, LGBTQ and racial and ethnic minorities are highly overrepresented among homeless youth. This is a very sad reality. And 2, many of these youth, again, as we sort of described before, but just to do it again, are living in places not meant for human habitation. Parks, tunnels, rooftops. Some are squatting, some are couch surfing, some are living in daily weeklies, and some are doubled up. And doubled up meaning one family becomes homeless, maybe an uncle or somebody else says, hey, family, come live with me. That puts too much stress on that family, and then all of a sudden, both families are out in the streets as well. So that's a phenomenon doubling up as well. So with that, we want to start some dialogue and start talking about this issue. And I think the way we want to do it is talk about why this issue exists, to extend, answer questions, have some dialogue, personal experiences, and then maybe at some point talk about what solutions do we have and what solutions are we missing and what can we do about it.
Raj, I just want to make an observation because there were a couple of questions about distinguishing unaccompanied minors from kids who are with their families. But parents in homeless families don't provide protective factors for their children the same way stable families do. So I don't want us to walk out here going, okay, the kids who are on the street are worse off than the kids who are surfing or doubled up or whatever definition the school district uses. Because often the factors that poverty, for example, or substance abuse or mental health with the parents put them in a situation where they don't or can't protect the kids, right? So you will have kids in homeless families where there are adults who are also engaging in survival sex, for example.
you will have kids in families with adults that are still being abused mentally, physically, sexually, et cetera, who still don't have enough to eat, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the protective factors that we normally think about when we think about children in families with adults may not exist for homeless families. The entire family is in such distress that a parent can be present and not present, or present, you know what I mean? So they don't necessarily provide the same kind of protective factors we normally think about, or stereotypically think about when we think about children in families with adults. So all the kids are at risk, is my point.
Absolutely, absolutely. And another unfortunate circumstance with the families that are homeless is that typically when they start accessing services, there are very few organizations that actually take care of the families in the unit. So what happens there is that the adults are actually separated from the youth, and that creates a problem. And those youth then become unaccompanied to that situation. So just because a youth is a family, just because a homeless youth is homeless with a family, is again at this point they're facing the exact same realities, and are also very high risk of becoming unaccompanied. And they're very so we frequently have to partner with adult service providers to try to keep the family intact somewhat, as through communication, case management, things like that.
I know it's hard to generalize, but what's happening to a lot of these youth emotionally?
I think we can all take turns answering that. Vince, you can go first.
Man, I mean, in terms of what's happening to the kids the most, I mean, a lot is happening. When it comes to being young and being thrust into any situation of being homeless, number one, you have to grow up pretty fast because you're introduced to a whole different reality. I want you guys, each of you, what were you doing when you were 15 years old? What was going through your mind? For most kids, it's probably going to be, regular things, go to school, hang out with your friends, do that type of stuff. But when you're out on the streets or when you are in any homeless situation, there's a lot in terms of stressors. You're always worried, and I'm not telling you this secondhand, I'm telling you it firsthand because I've been in a lot of these different situations. You're always worried about what's going to come next, even when you're feeling a little secure. When you're in a family homelessness situation and you get that new apartment, but you have a history of getting evicted, you're always worried who's knocking at the door. So there's a lot of stress. When you're young and you're out on the streets, you do have to make adult decisions, and that can wear on you because, again, you're still a child. So you're forced to kind of, at least from my perspective, take on the mantle and the responsibilities of an adult. Trying to figure out where you're going to get food, where you're going to sleep, all those things like that is a lot of pressure. And then as a result of that, you're going to see these kids resorting to things to alleviate that stress and pressure, and that can manifest itself in a lot of different ways. And that's just from my perspective. It's kind of too broad of a question for me even to really specifically answer because every kid's different. But pressure, stress, and looking to find ways to get away from that stress, and that's when you start to see some of the other behaviors kind of manifest themselves.
Yeah, and to Vince's point, two homeless youth are alike. We have homeless youth that are extremely intelligent, but can't look you in the eyes. They can't look at an adult. We have kids that we see that are experts in hustling, but haven't been to school since 3rd grade. We see kids who have a slew of conditions, and their unique circumstances of what happened to them leaving their house often plays highly into what they're thinking and what their sort of emotional state is. But we kind of simply frame it as survival. When they're in these circumstances, their emotional state is one where they're not very forward-oriented, they're not making very healthy decisions about themselves and their body or their future. In fact, they're often sacrificing those very things to just get by the next day or something like that. That is one of the first things that any provider, anyone who's in this homeless space, the youth homeless space, needs to overcome, needs to dispel, which is survival. Is get these youth out of survival and out of that emotional state where they can't trust anyone, where they're thinking about just the next couple of hours, where they can eat, how they can be victimized.
And something else to even add on top when we're talking about youth in particular, about that survival mode. There's all kinds of neuroscience, right, that says anybody under 25 doesn't have a full understanding of consequences of their actions, right, in certain ways that kind of why a kid could get really mad, like throw something, and then you're like, oh my God, that hit you, I'm so sorry, I didn't know it was gonna hit you. Like that, those thought processes aren't like fully developed, and there's a lot of neuroscience to back that up, and there's also a lot of neuroscience that extreme poverty and being in survival mode and in situations where you are always thinking about the next hour and the next, and always being worried, that heightened kind of fight or flight mode also really limits your thinking of long-term consequences and long-term thinking of the future and all of those kinds of complicated things. So imagine you're young, you're always in this survival mode, like Arash was saying, and Vince was saying, and then all these things combined really make it so that it can, all that kind of trauma on your brain can also make it really, really difficult to institute that long-term thinking and that thinking beyond just tomorrow and today and all of that. And I think that's a big emotional impact on homeless youth as well. And in addition, things that came up in the conversation, feeling like everybody that you've ever known has abandoned you and that you don't have anybody you can count on, and are you worth, what are you worth as an individual person? And that's, things like we always, when people come to our facility and we show them the places where we celebrate kids' birthdays or celebrate kids' graduations or things like that, just to know that that's such a huge deal. If you're 15 years old and you're on the street and nobody's there to help you or support you or celebrate your accomplishments or care about you and listen to you. And we have so many kids who tell us the best thing that an organization ever gave them wasn't food or shelter or education, but was just somebody who listened to them and actually cared about what happened to them. And so that's, I think, a really major emotional factor for homeless youth as well.
What percentage of homeless youth ultimately find stability as an adult versus ultimately perishing on the streets?
That is, I'm not sure I have the statistic.
I don't think that's
because I don't think it's measured.
Yeah.
That's definitely longitudinal study. That there's a lot of absence of good data around homeless youth. The entire nation is realizing that we need to do we have to have more concerted effort around data collection. Because youth homelessness really hasn't been a prevalent issue because it's been lost in other issues, sex trafficking, juvenile arrest, this, that. So the layers kind of need to be peeled back, and we're still, as a nation, I think, working on that and really trying to structure the data so we can answer questions like that and have effective longitudinal studies that can show us that.
The reason I ask is because as you're talking about the developmental aspects, I would imagine that probably there are a lot of youth who, without having the opportunity to have that support to develop into fully functional adults, wind up simply following that pattern.
Yes, without putting a percentage or a measurement to it, I can tell you that there, unfortunately, in this community, many other communities, youth homeless, when they're homeless in their youth, they very frequently transition to becoming adults who are homeless, and then it becomes a lifetime of chronic homelessness, because you are right, the longer they're in that situation without help, nurturing resources, or safety net, the more they become hardened to that lifestyle, the more they become accustomed to hustling and other elements. And then if you talk to some of our adult providers, they'll tell you that the interventions are more challenging the older they get and the more they go without that GDD, without those critical educational elements that can help them become self-sufficient and independent. And then another thing to add to the emotional question is, we gotta kind of have a paradigm shift. So a lot of people think when I'm talking about homeless youth, well, why don't they go do this? Why don't they go access that service? Why don't they go do this? Well, you got to think about it. We're adults now. We learned all that stuff. But when I was 15, 16, 17, 18, I did not know about any way to help myself. I didn't know basic things about renting, account balances, this, that. Nevertheless, about public welfare, social aid, and things like that. So another way to think about them in times, they're very lost and they're very confused because they realize the situation. I mean, they're out on the streets. They don't have anyone to help them or anything. And they're lost because they don't know what to do and where to go. And we as adults have learned over the years, through our families, through education, through community settings, etc., that there are ways that we can get help if something happens. I can go to a welfare office if I need Medicaid or whatever the case may be. But these youth, they don't know this stuff. They're out on the streets in the most critical formative educational years. So they've lost that. So another way to think about it is they're very lost. They're very confused. They're vulnerable, and they realize that because they don't know how to help themselves at all.
Can children under 18 apply for welfare and those types of systems? No. So,
And I mean, there's certain social services that someone under 18 can get, children can get, but not unaccompanied.
not in the country. So, I see here where a lot of the things that you help them with is to get things like IDs. You get your IDs, you get your birth certificate, your ID, go get a job. I'm assuming that is something that is offered as a service to help
Yes.
them prepare to get jobs. So you have a youth that is homeless, prepared for a job, gets a job. Okay. Are there steps after that to help a child under 18 to go get an apartment? You can't sign a contract legally under 18 years old. So
Well,
if they have a job, but how are they getting someplace to live? You know, you have an income, but you can't sign a contract under 18 years old. 16 years old, you have a job, you have nowhere to live still.
you pointed out a huge barrier for homeless youth, but if you, our intervention, the way we work with the youth, you know, is there's a couple core outcomes that we always think about: workforce development, education, housing stability, and then of course things like life skills, just some of the things that we talked about, but other things that we haven't mentioned, like how to drive, how to access a bus system, very simple things that we really take for granted that are paramount importance in those years. Gosh, I lost my train of thought.
The housing.
Oh yeah, housing, thank you, housing youth under 18. So with our interventions, really when we get youth who are under 18, we're really more focused on trying to pursue the education route, as opposed to just getting a job and getting a place and saying, hey, that's it. Because we aren't trying to necessarily just stabilize this youth right above poverty and saying, hey, good luck, you know, just keep going, keep working, keep doing this, you're gonna figure this out. Because aside from just these resource barriers that they have other conditions that are co-occurring at the same time, mental health conditions, other things that need to be overcome. So one of the biggest formulas interventions is having a safety net for these youth to get out of survival mode and start to be forward oriented. And depending on their unique circumstances, some may end up in school for years, etc. We try to focus interventions on what they're missing and what we believe that they need, what tools and resources they need, and what education they need to become self-sufficient young adults. So typically, we're worried more about education during that time. In case under 18 that are experiencing homelessness, we really want to get them into transitional housing programs. And these are housing programs that we have and other organizations offer where youth can actually live with us while they're getting the other care that they need.
Okay, so that is available.
Practice getting a job. Because the other thing we don't want to do is set up the youth to the point where they have a job, have a place, and they go, okay, we've taught you everything, here's your manual on how to live, hopefully you'll survive. Because if you remember when I first got my first place, I didn't pay the rent right, I almost got in a lot of trouble, I had troubles like making my bills, this and that. So youth not only need to learn about these things that they don't know what to do to be self-sufficient, but then they need a safe environment to practice that. And that's typically what a parent or family unit does, to provide that environment where they can make those mistakes, learn from those mistakes, and still have that safety net so they don't get rock bottom.
So they do have, there are places available for them to stay.
Yeah,
They're not having to try to go to school and live in the street at the same time. It's
Yes.
available.
Yeah. So just to give you a quick thing, and we can talk about it HY a little bit, but just for example, our service offers, we offer an entire sort of continuum of groupings of services that kind of work together. So it's not just about an emergent shelter, it's not just about a drop-in center, where many of those resources are for sure available in a drop-in center, but you're right, it is about housing, it is about why aren't you home, and reunification a possibility. But also, aside from housing, sometimes they need other very specialized services. Youth are plagued by all kinds of circumstances. They can be pregnant, they can be high on heroin constantly, they can't get themselves off drugs, the juice, or whatever they are. So all these things also need to be mitigated and taken care of before we can even get to the point of working on education and housing interventions and this and that. So we try to design an entire service offering that tries to help the youth anywhere they are in their journey of homelessness, whether they're on the streets and they don't want to come in and get any sort of services, so we try to bring the streets out of them, they're brave enough to take the next step to come in, and then we figure out what's wrong with them. Some don't want assistance with housing. Some are perfectly happy with house surfing. They need a place to take a shower, need some mental health assistance, whatever the case may be. But we always try to get youth who are eligible and appropriate into a transitional housing program because that is the most stability that they can have while they learn to do all the stuff.
And I think the real issue with that is that kind of what we mentioned about that Nevada is first in the country for unsheltered homeless youth, meaning that they're not in emergency shelters or transitional housing programs or other homeless services programs where they are housed at least temporarily. That's really one of the major issues in our community, right? So our program, we have 20 transitional housing beds. And there are a couple there's a handful of organizations in town that can serve under 18. There are also a few more that serve youth 18 to 24 in addition, but that just regardless of even how many there are, we talked about there being over 2,000 unaccompanied homeless youth, about a little under half of them are under 18 or so, they goes up to 24. So there's just not enough beds in our community and not, for all kinds of reasons, not enough resources, not enough community attention to this issue, funding, et cetera. But yeah, there are transitional housing programs that are full of youth all the time, but we need more in order to meet the need in our community for that.
We're definitely resource sufficient in that regard, yeah, absolutely.
And foster care is always the solution to that. There's not enough beds in foster care, as well as the kids that age out of foster care and aren't ready to be independent and on their own. That's a whole other issue of at-risk youth.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. Foster care is important, yes, absolutely. Yeah, there's the quick thing with foster care though is that the older youth get, the less likely they are to have a positive or meaningful or effective experience with foster care. So if you're
And then they age out, and they're not ready to be on their own. They don't have the skills, which they haven't had because they've been bouncing around in different foster care homes.
Yeah, the irony of that is that, there was a local assembly bill that extended basically the age of foster care from 18 to 21 because of the prevalence of these youth exiting foster care and not being ready. Think about that. Foster care is only a minority percentage of the overall homeless youth problem. There are kids that don't have access to a foster care parent and have never been given any resources to the age of 18, and they're in the exact same situation as those kids are when they're 18 and not worse. So, but yes, foster care is definitely a big component. There's many kids that are exiting foster care into homelessness, and those are kids that we also see in our facilities as well, yes. Because, again, to Melissa's point, and several other points, just because someone reaches 18 is such a weird number, like 18 is as legal age as this and that, and the science proves that you're not mentally developed yet until almost 30. So, to your point, just to put a kid to get a job, put an apartment at 16, I don't know what I would know in an apartment at 16, but I would have I don't know if you were 18. Even 18, even 20, even 21. I wouldn't say I was ready for a lot of things. I was still learning what to do. And, that's the thing that a lot of us take for granted, too, is that we think when we're 18, we become adults. How many people here went to college? All right. College is kind of a halfway house becoming an adult, isn't it? Absolutely. It really is, right?
It's a transitional program.
It's a transitional program, exactly. It really is.
Supervised housing, meals,
Supervised housing, meals are cooked for you, you have security around, you still have some rules, you gotta follow the phone rules, you gotta follow this, you have advisors, you have counselors, you have all kinds of people helping you, guiding you. And then, what happens if you can't pay your bills, this and that, when you're in college? Who do you call? Mom. All right. So imagine a situation with these youth, they don't have any of that. So, and what that is like. So just because you're 18, that's not some magic number that deems you ready for society and independence necessarily. Don't use that too much against your mom. But that is another reality that this youth faces.
We have interns that work that are, in their fourth year of degree program, and I constantly have to remind myself to communicate and work at the level where they are now.
Yes.
And these are kids who are in college and have all of that support mechanism and have all of those things going for them. And if they didn't have that, it would be a completely different story.
Yeah. So imagine what that was like, starting like that when you're 13, 14, 15, and to Vince's point, having to grow up essentially overnight, but without the know-how with which to grow up, really. Which is why, unfortunately, youth quickly turn to illicit behavior on the streets. And this is why it's so easy for sexual traffickers, drug dealers, and other people to tempt or lure these youth into those horrible nets. Why? Because if, like that wallet, you don't have your ID, you don't have a way to go get a job, you try to go get a job 5 times, blah, blah, blah. Well, the guy in the corner keeps watching you come back. The guy in the corner is a sexual trafficker and a pimp. Great. The guy in the corner says, hey, you know, you want to make $100 a day, you want to make $200 a day, you want this Louis Vuitton bag, you don't got to work, you don't got to do all that. Just come talk to me. And that's what happens, because they're not armed with that wherewithal of, like, you know, how to actually avoid that, or that there's other options besides that. They're lured into that very quickly, because at that age you don't have that bandwidth, right? And that's how we end up with sexual trafficking victims. That's how we end up with, you know, labor trafficking victims. That's how we end up with youth who are victimized on the streets constantly. It has to also do with the fact that they're missing out on the most critical formative education years. And by education, I do not just mean school. I mean love, nurturing. I mean parents guiding you and telling you, you know, what to do with yourself, you know, when you're maybe dating, when you're maybe going out for the first time, when you're maybe thinking about going to college or getting that first job. Even if these youth can go get a job, there's no one there supporting them. There's no one else, no one there helping them, telling them, here's the best practices. Here's, you know, like Melissa said, you can't throw a pen at your boss and go, I realize I was going to hit you like that, my bad. Or things like that, right? So it's a very, very challenging situation for these youth, but also it's a very challenging situation in terms of how you provide services to youth, because they are not just, it's not like every youth can be categorized into type A, type B, type C. There's about 5,000 types, and every day it's growing and morphing and exponentially increasing, right? So it's, the name of the game is, aside from, you know, finding them or creating an environment where they're building enough trust for them to come to you, but then after that is figuring out the unique nuances that define that particular individual and what their barriers are, what they need, what they're lacking, what they already have strength in, and then adapting services to that. So it's not a one-size-fits-all, but rather it's us finding the right fit for them. And that is why I consider our agency, and I know many other agencies in town who deal with homelessness in general, regardless of the youth or whatever. That's something that they do day in, day out very effectively, is really try to understand all these issues that are playing, and then having to try to peel that apart and figuring out what to manage, and then even how to prioritize that service delivery too. But for that age, education is of paramount importance, because, you know, longitudinally, to your point, we don't want to just get youth barely out of that situation, or just hovering or straddling that line of poverty, or that, you know, where they can quickly be in imminent risk of becoming a homeless adult, or whatever the case may be. So the crazy thing is that these youth, they're very resilient. We get some kids that, I'm not one to really talk about the horror stories. Vince, if you want to share some, but, you know, there's these kids are getting raped by their parents. I mean, just awful things, access of their bodies when they're very young, and this, all kinds of crazy, horrible things. Or we've had kids that have been locked in closets by their parents, like years at a time, slipping food under the doors, not being allowed to go to school, or told if they want to go to school, they gotta walk 12 miles. So smooth. It's amazing how resilient and strong these youth are. It really is. And when they can get out of that survival, and when they can be in a positive and supportive environment where they can actually have an outlook and see the future, after that it becomes about, okay, how do we get you there? Because they have that self-determination, you know what, I want to be a doctor, I want to do this, I want to do that, blah, blah, blah. Versus 6 months ago when they came to our facility, you know, they're like, man, screw you, blah, blah, blah. You know, grab the food, go sit over there and not talk to anyone, and all of a sudden they're coming back by and say, hey, check out this essay. Can you work on me with this? Can you work on me with that? So sometimes kids are in school, so they have to get back into school. So every time it's something different. But it really is amazing working there and seeing these youth day in and day out, how resilient they are, how they give life and things a second chance. And it's amazing what they can do with little love, supportive safety net, time, resources, and education. It really is. But all those things don't come cheap. For example, doing those 20 transitional housing beds. cases have got 20 kids. Our drop-in center gets sometimes 400 unduplicated visits annually. It's over 4,000 or 5,000 visits, those 400 kids. So that's meals, that's accessing services, that's...
400 how often?
Our drop-in center is one of our programs, and a lot of the service offerings are that little postcard right there. The drop-in center really is the nexus and hub of all of our operations. So we have about 8 or 9 facilities, but the drop-in centers are only publicly accessible, and the rest of them are emergency shelters or housing or other facilities for our workers that do the housing.
How many a month do you see?
So anyway, our drop-in center, for example, just an average annually of a low ball is to say about 400 unduplicated youth that come around 4,000 to 5,000 visits annually. So that's not a one-time shot, that's coming back to keep access services. Because again, the name of the game is that even if you're lucky enough to get into your door, it's not like, okay, well, why don't you fill out this 2-page questionnaire? Well, here's all the things you need. We're going to get you on your way now. It's not that at all. Sometimes it takes years to even uncover what the real situation is. And just because the youth are brave enough to come to you doesn't mean they're going to be straight up. It doesn't mean they're going to admit everything to you. So it does really take time to even uncover what's going on, which is why this frequency of visits is highly encouraged. If you come to a drop-in center, it looks and feels like a home. It does not look like an institutional or clinical environment whatsoever. It's easy to turn around and go, see ya, right? But it looks like a home. It feels like a home because we're really trying to get them to come back and keep coming back, because that's the only way that we can keep uncovering things and keep providing services and keep demonstrating and showing to them that there are pathways to successfully get out of this and to where you want to be. So that's very important for us.
No, you go ahead.
I have a question. As far as the numbers go, I know that not all of that is youth from Las Vegas or even from Nevada. How much of what do you any idea what the percentages of runaways that come to this area? Because I know New York and Los Angeles both suffer from this, where huge numbers of the runaways are not from that metropolitan area. What kind of percentage are we looking at as not just homeless, but displaced homeless youths in this area that are not from here?
I think in the past when we talked about this, we said I think that approximately like 40% of our population is not from Vegas or is from somewhere else. And we definitely had kids that couch-surfing and homeless and sort of migrated from shelter to shelter as far as away from New York, as far as away from Washington.
Well, that in itself presents even more problems then, because you're talking about you have to approach services in other states.
Well, right.
As far as getting documentation.
We get birth certificates in all 50 states. It becomes a challenge for things like foster care and other things. So it's a lot of issues. And then, you got to also think about the seasonality of youth homelessness as well, too, in an environment like this. What happens to a homeless youth that's in Utah or in Oregon in the middle of winter? They don't have a place to stay. There's not enough shelter beds. What happens? They can literally freeze to death. So we have a lot of youth that actually migrate here because of the climate and conditions. Because where they are, they literally freeze or die otherwise. So we definitely have an influx because of that as well. You were going to say something?
Oh, no, I was just wondering if anybody here kind of had personal experience with homelessness in general.
You personally?
Yeah, personal experience. Like, has anyone been near homeless, been close to, just to try to get into the mentality of not only like what a kid is going through, but what a person in general is going through. So I don't know if you raised your hand, maybe you want to share that, or?
Well, when I was an exchange student in South America when I was 16. While I was gone, my parents got divorced. South America, Colombia, South America. I was a runaway exchange student. My parents got divorced while I was gone. I knew it was going to happen. Sold house, came home. I had an 18-year-old sister who had just finished cosmetology school. She didn't have, they kicked her out of the house. So she got a boyfriend, so she had a place to live. Well, when I came back, my mom came for my graduation. I came back, graduated from high school at 17. She lived in South Carolina. She got on a bus and she left. My father lived elsewhere. They left me there. I mean, we were staying at my sister's apartment with her boyfriend, but I was 17 years old, I just graduated, didn't have a driver's license. Thank God my sister let me stay there. But I mean, even down the road, when I finally kind of was able to leave a little bit, there were times when I was actually having to have sex with someone to pay the rent for where I was living.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, you described a situation that, we all think about homeless people or homeless youth, and there's, we always think about the abuse, we always think about the neglect, the abandonment, all those really bad things, right? But you don't think about a situation like a divorce leading to all of this stuff. And more importantly is, if one variable changed, right, with your sister, maybe she gets tired of you being there and says, you can't stay there.
Maybe the boyfriend.
Maybe the boyfriend does. You could be in a situation where we would have described you as a couch surfer. You know what I mean? So really, I think it's important.
And that's basically, that's what I was. I mean, and then, okay, well, finally my mom will let me come stay for a little while. Well, her husband, not real keen on having a teenage, so, okay, I had a job, I gotta get out of here. I'll find a boyfriend. I'll move in with the boyfriend. Oh, well then, the boyfriend, well, you're gonna have to have sex with this guy that we're living in his house to pay the rent, that kind of thing. And I mean, if you look back, I wasn't raised that way. It was a good family. It was, nobody would ever have predicted that. So it's not just the kids that, like you said, that are abused, which, yes, you can, but it's just normal everyday kids from great households that, or if you're different. We talk, you would said a lot, like 40% are.
It takes them out.
They come out, parents. So it can be a very prominent family. Gone.
And I'm happy you said that because it's really important to realize that, youth homelessness, the faces of homeless youth, they really do transcend, typical socioeconomic correlations. Like, it's not just kids in welfare, it's not just kids that, live in life out of poverty or whatever the case may be. We have kids that are fifth generation, doctors' family, kids that have been kicked out of the homes that they used to go West Point, kids who came out of their families, came out to their families, and were basically given a $20 bill and given a bus pass and say, get the hell out of here, never come back. We've had kids who come from very rich families, very affluent families. In fact, we've even had, I think I can say this, we've even had a celebrity's child with us because, to your point, divorce, family breakdown. Family breakdown doesn't have to be because of things that we think of drugs, just like easy scenarios. It can also be almost very common breakdowns where Vince says the slightest difference, the slightest change in one variable could have made the difference between you escaping that situation and becoming a victim of that situation. So that's also very important to keep in mind that, youth, no two are alike and no two backgrounds are really alike. So it's not like we're just getting welfare kids coming in. There's all kinds of kids from all kinds of conditions. And then there's cultural factors too. The tribes around here face huge homelessness problems because there's a lot of cultural issues within the tribe and things like that. So just every day we're learning of new reasons and new factors and new things that can contribute to youth homelessness. And you also got to think about if there's other issues or things in the community that care about, education, sex trafficking, juvenile education, whatever that may be, these things are highly correlated to youth homelessness. So, like, we're talking about sex trafficking victims. There are some sex trafficking victims that get, dated out of their homes. But more often than not, it's because they're in a situation where they don't have another choice. They don't have another resource. They don't have another avenue. And they're actually targeted. We even have pimps that try to infiltrate our drop-in center by sending a young lady or a young man to pretend that they're, whatever, to try to go recruit people out of them. So, this is unfortunately, the illicit entrepreneurs in our community, they are very intelligent. They're very clever. And, it's a constant battle. So, every day we could be doing something else in that regard. But that is a really excellent point. Thank you for sharing that.
Yes, thank you very much.
Well, and then if you have these kids that come from affluent families or anything else, unfortunately, you have those people that say to them, wait, you're living in the street? Well, why don't you just call your mom?
Yeah.
And they just, that's like asking that child to crawl on their knees.
No, just I'm sure he'll cover probably a different angle, but you know, when you think about the issue of youth homelessness, it's really complicated. You know, it's so, you know, I guess part of the reason why I asked the question is who's kind of experienced homelessness is because I want people to be able to relate to the issue so that we can all contribute to the discussion, you know, but it is like really, really complicated and people don't get it. And that's the thing about it. I mean, you know, when we think about adults, right, who are homeless, it kind of, we see it all the time, it's right there, and in our minds we are already kind of making judgments, and we don't really have a lot of sympathy either. You know, we look at the homeless adult, right, oh, well, he's on the corner, he probably addicted to drugs and alcohol or something from mental health. That's all he could go to a job. Yeah. But we don't see a lot of kids who are homeless out there, it's not visible, right? So in that, people don't understand it, and that's where you get situations like that happening.
Yeah. And I was going to say, you know, dispel another myth real quick is that sometimes people think that homeless youth are punks, that they're kids that could have been at home but aren't home simply because they didn't follow rules. It was like, well, I would have kicked you out too, or I would have blah, blah, blah. And that's not the case. We maybe once in a blue moon get youth like that at our facilities that follow a rule, ran away or something like that. They're usually back home within a couple hours. The overwhelming majority of youth that we deal with are not punks, they're victims. They didn't do anything wrong. Circumstances happened to them. And there's a lot of people who still think that it's their fault, that, oh, they did this because of choices. And they're like, no, they didn't make the choices. Other people made the choices that affected them, unfortunately, and put them in that situation. Yeah.
So if I'm a homeless kid running around, how do you find me, or how do I find you? Is this something that I hear about? Are there other kids around me who talk about, you know, these kinds of programs?
I mean,
You know, I just show up in a business somewhere and like, I mean, because the center, you guys have interaction with kids, right?
yeah.
I actually have a funny story. I came to an Uber to your place. So this is a multi-family, dysfunctional home. There's mental health issues, meth being dealt out of the home. And so I am friends with the sister, who is the half-sister to the teen. There's no food in the house, all sorts of stuff going on. So we asked, what's the best thing? So we're told to call Child Protective Services. Well, we didn't think that wasn't maybe the route we should have gone first. But so he is accidentally labeled as a runaway, which I learned through this case, that it only gives you 72 hours that you can hold him and he's returned to the home. Isn't it? Is it 72?
Unless you're in page 1.
Yeah. So, but was put in a separate facility, not yours, but things weren't good, hadn't had any food, was hungry, took an Uber, which that never happens when his sister gave him her account, took it over to their place, and I called them and they're like, yeah, this kid ran away in an Uber. But was that bad that was just fed up, even the slightest thing to set him off at the other place, so went over to their place, but then because it was accidentally filed as a runaway case, had to be returned back to that home, which is super dysfunctional, and I'm trying to still sort that all out, but that was a case where, you know, we thought we were doing everything right, but this poor kid had to go back into that situation.
Yeah, and to answer your question, we practice multi-pronged outreach and peer-to-peer kind of review. And Vince, unless you guys talk about that, something real quick that you said about Child Protective Services. Another thing is, a lot of people go, well, hey, there's foster care, there's Child Protective Services. Why is there agencies like this around? Child Protective Services should be protecting and providing services to kids. Child Protective Services in our community annually probably gets over 20,000 cases. Out of those, less than 2,000 are actually investigated, and out of that, about over 10 to 50% are actually successfully closed. A lot of kids that are complaining about abuse or going back home or being forced to go back home without it being properly investigated, and frequently we get those kids at our doors. They tried CPS 4 or 5 times, or even while they have a CPS case, they have to be living with us or staying with us while that case is managed. Because again, 72 hours, you know, who can investigate that? But even if a kid makes a complaint, it takes time to figure out if that complaint is valid or not, this, that. And unfortunately, they often don't have a voice in that.
Well, and it put him back in harm's
And
way.
they put him, exactly, they
When he
do.
got returned back to the home, which if we would have known, he could have gone to the shelter first, and then he could have filed the claim when he was in their spot and been safe.
We have a lot of,
Institutions.
excuse me?
Which then just reinforces the failure of institutions to be there for the kid.
Yes.
Well, and so, in doubt, like in that case, he doesn't ever want to tell him, doesn't want to do anything again, because of what it did to his
Well,
life.
and like Vince was saying earlier, you don't know who to trust. A, you don't know who to trust, and B, you don't want anybody to know. So that's, as Monica was asking, how is it that the kids find the services? Because you're a homeless kid, you're not gonna talk to somebody else that you're homeless, you're trying to avoid that stigma that you have. So how do you get the trust to get the kids to help themselves and all that? Because
It,
how do you, how
it takes, yeah, it
how do you
takes,
find?
yeah, so it takes a lot of work, number one. But number one, we're fortunate to have the Safe Place program, which is a national program, crisis intervention, which we already talked about. So at every terrible herbs, we've got a big yellow diamond-shaped sign where kids can go, a beacon of hope on almost every major cross street. Now, there's many different levels of outreach that we do to let these kids know. There's firsthand outreach by going out in the streets, trying to interact with them and building a rapport with them. When you're doing outreach work, especially, and you can attest to this, it's not about day one. It's not about what we do at our first interaction. You're really just trying to let them know, hey, we're cool, we're here to help. And over time, you build a bond with them, get to know them, and then you want to gradually encourage them maybe to access services. It may never happen, but part of outreach is providing them with the services that they need while they're on the streets. But for our agency, we also are extremely aggressive in our outreach to the community in general, and also the Clark County School District. Now, if we know that there are over 11,000 homeless students, grades K through 12, enrolled in local high schools, as according to last year, we're going to go to schools. We train each school has a homeless youth advocate. And just to really attest to how prevalent this problem is, right? Every public high school in our community has a homeless youth advocate in it. Think about that. That's Palo Verde, that's Coronado, and I've met kids who are homeless in all of those schools. So we go into the schools, we educate kids, we do lunch hour activities, we do classroom presentations. We're educating kids, and we're educating every kid, and we're telling them about Safe Place as well as MPHY, because people hear, oh, homeless kid, homeless youth, I'm not homeless, and then mom kicks them out 2 weeks later. We tell them about Safe Place. It's a catch-all and it's a fail-safe. So that's our approach, and we've had television ads on Cartoon Network. We've done all kinds of stuff, PSAs on the radio, so yes.
But you also talk about homeless youth and all that, and the ones that aren't in school,
Yeah.
like you said. So how?
That's street outreach. That's going out directly in the streets and trying to find them.
But
But again,
except by trying to find them. That's
Yeah.
not good. Like, I know you mentioned it the other day, the last conversation we had, about the children that showed up at your company's party, at your party, okay, at the picnic, that nobody knew that they didn't belong
Until the end.
there. So when everybody was gathering up their kids, these 5 kids were standing there, and then they disappeared into the park. But nobody recognized the difference because they're all dirty. Every other little kid out there was dirty. Okay, it's not like there's a sign that goes, I'm a homeless youth.
You're exactly right. You're exactly
Okay,
right.
and I've never been homeless. I have had friends that have been close to that, or have, like you said, couch surfing. Bad situations at their house. Okay, and my mom, I will have to say, was one of the greatest ladies and all that. She didn't care. Okay, our door was always open to anybody that needed a handout.
That's great.
Okay, we never had a problem with that. We've never had an issue. But the ability for people to find that is okay. I had a couple of friends of mine in high school. One of them committed suicide because his situation at home was so bad and all that, and he wasn't telling anybody. He never said a word about it. And okay, suicide was his answer, which really hurt a lot of us because we never knew. And if he had said something like you said, it's not something you brag about. It's not something you want anybody to know and all that. So the ability to help the ones that don't really want to be known, but need the help most of all. You know, and how do you reach that point?
Well, see, and
That's hard.
that's again those two where the Safe Place program is so important. Because Safe Place is a catch-all. Bullied, kicked out, lost, scared, suicidal feelings. These are all things we actually put on the cards that we give out of schools. So it covers so many different things, but there's no way to reach every, so we do what we can. I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, we can think about it in two ways. One, so we have the youth that you're talking about, the ones that are actually experiencing homelessness. They're hiding that. They're anywhere and everywhere. Well, we have a couple ideas. We do know that there are kids in schools that are, hiding their status but are homeless. We do know that there's certain areas where homeless youth congregate. We talk to other outreach teams. We talk to Metro. We hear the situation of those 4 or 5 kids that are in a park or Fremont Street or out there by older highways, so that we can go concentrate outreach out there and try to look for kids and try to get that message out there and spread that out there. So we are looking for hotbeds where we see that type of activity or where we know that there could be prevalence of youth homelessness, and then go out there and try to concentrate services out there. But really, part of the outreach game is preventative anyway. And what that means is that, think about it, homeless youth is very unpredictable, happens very suddenly. So for those kids that are already experiencing with it, we have outreach methods that we go try to find them. We have partners that refer them. We go train the counselors in schools. We talk to the social workers and counselors at adult agencies, the city, everywhere. And we get calls all the time saying, hey, we see this, or hey, we see that. That's really the part of how the community kind of works together on outreach and things like that. But then you also got to think about it from a preventative point of view, which is youth may not know that they're going to be homeless tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. So part of our outreach education is where we go into schools and we talk to every youth. We assume everyone can be in that situation tomorrow. And we tell everyone about the message in every classroom, at every lunchtime, and anywhere and everywhere we can within the school, and other settings where kids, congregate, camps, community parks, whatever the case may be. And we tell everyone. We kind of have them think about Safe Place as kind of like a personal 911 for them. Not like a personal 911, but a personal response team. So if you're in a situation, you're bullying, parents getting divorced, your kid, one of your friends is drunk and getting in a car, you want to be with that, all the way to Safe Place calls we get, say, hey, my kid passed out, I'm 16, the needle's in his arm right now, he's going to be passed out for about 15 minutes, where can I go, what can I do? So we arm the youth with that education of what to do in a situation if they get kicked out of the house, or if they have to run away, or whatever the case may be, and we saturate them with that message in hopes that they remember us when they're in that situation as well. Because you're all right, they're not wearing an HY that says MNHY, and if we were walked into a classroom and did that, no one would ever listen to us again. And then the other thing we do things like this. We go talk to adults, we go talk to people who are in positions where they see youth, and we educate them about what things to look for, what sort of factors that you can sort of visually observe, or through other factors that will lead you to believe that this kid is homeless or experiencing that or at risk. And then intervention can happen that way. Maybe they'll go say, hey Johnny, I've noticed that you spent the night in my house now for the last 6 nights. I've noticed I haven't talked to your parents in a while. What's going on? I've heard about this Safe Place program, and I really think that we should call it. And then from there, we can kind of take over. But I will admit that one of the most challenging things that we all have, anyone in this business, is trying to find that population. Because if you guys would just close your eyes for a second and think about a homeless person, just think about the first thing you see in your eyes when you see a homeless person. What do you see? An adult either maybe holding a street sign in the corner, pushing a shopping cart, something like that. What we don't see is a youth. They're never going to be out there going, I'm a youth, please help me, or something like that.
So if we're in the community and notice, and I say this because in the neighborhood we live in, we have an office, and there are different times during the year where there's a larger concentration of youth out there on a fairly regular basis until they get shooed away by the merchants. That it's more than obvious that they've got backpacks or luggage, pieces of luggage or something like that, and they're not shoppers, they're not just loiterers. Is there a way that somebody that is observant on the community side to let you guys know that hey, you might wanna go to the Allisons at being serious, because there's a bunch of kids there. Well, Springs and
That
Eastern.
card, yeah, that card right over there, just, it has our contact information, or you could,
Well, there's two things. You can either call us and say, hey, we're noticing some youth that may be experiencing or at risk in this location. We'll dispatch an outreach team out there to go meet with them. And sometimes we get a call saying, there is a kid on the corner over here. And, we try to go respond immediately. But then also, if you're ever in a situation where, a youth comes to you and you feel that they may be homeless or something like that, and you're directly interacting with them, you can always tell them to access Safeways. And you can access Safeways by dialing the certain number, or just going to the nearest terrible herbs, the nearest fire department, or getting on the nearest bus and asking for Safeways.
and if they need.
And that's 24 hours around that number.
24 hours a day, 7 days.
Because I just realized when we printed those health cards,
1-866.
and we put only adult services on them.
What's that?
1-866.
Yeah,
It should be on the car safety.
Yeah.
And it is a 24/7 off.
To the camera when you say.
Oh. Yeah, 1-866, you are safe.
Oh, right, can we do a shameless plug for the youth working group too? Because part of the solution is larger than the handful of social service agencies that are working on it right now. Like we need some systemic changes. Like we criminalize runaways, right? We criminalize that rather than intervening as a support network. That's a systemic issue, right? And so Arash is the champion for the ending youth homelessness working group that is part of the regional effort to end homelessness. And that is really to take a comprehensive look at both the barriers to getting youth into existing services, the challenges to identifying and adequately serving the youth that we haven't, and then building this bridge. We're having a discussion about what's a youth. We say it's up to 24, but there are funding streams or systems that say it's 18 and under. It's got to be above a certain age. Because there are no 5-year-olds that are homeless. Well, we know at least one 7-year-old that went to school, came home, and parents were gone from the apartment. The kid just sat on the steps because he didn't know what to do. 7. So folks are saying, well, we're talking about teenagers. We could be talking about a 7-year-old, right? So this group is looking at sort of the whole breadth and depth of the issue. It is a national initiative to end youth homelessness by 2020. Did I get the year right? We don't want to wait till 2019 to start having a meaningful conversation because it is so complex. To Vince's point, it is a very complex problem that has many stakeholders. It is about juvenile justice. It is about family courts. It is about mental health. That's a lot.
Education.
And education. It is human trafficking. It is, you name it. It is a number of those things that end up impacting whether or not a youth is stably housed. So this group, there are applications on the table for people to become a part of this regional body. Even if it's just to get the emails, I like to say, let at least communicate with each other about this. But there's a continuum of care. Anybody in the community that's interested in homelessness can come and vote. You can vote, right? And there's also a board that Arash and I, and you're an alternate, right? Are you an alternate? I'm an alternate. Alternate for, right? So there is this board that is actually approving funding decisions about how we use resources. So the entire community gets to tell that board what our policy and funding priorities ought to be. And I want to encourage everybody to think about your level of engagement because it is so complex. It does matter that you're in the conversation. So there are applications. You can do it online, so just get the website on one of the apps if you don't want to do a pen and paper one. But get the information and tell that to somebody else because it may not be you, but it's someone else that needs to be engaged in the conversation. And Arash will be the champion, and the region will support that push to really have some meaningful resolution, more housing, more transitional programs.
better educational bridges from post-secondary. Third grade literacy rates. What has third grade literacy rates got to do with youth homelessness? We know that kids don't read and write by third grade. They're more likely to drop out of school, more likely to become engaged in the criminal justice system, and more likely to become homeless. So I tell you right now, by third grade, if we don't do something about literacy, then we're never going to impact youth homelessness in a meaningful way, right? The prison industry looks at third and fifth grade standardized tests to decide how many prison beds to build. So they know better than we do, and they make their funding decisions and their priority decisions based on data that our kids are giving them, right? We say, oh, well, we know that this many kids in this part of the region, and they will construct prisons based on those standardized tests, but we won't construct housing based on those standardized tests. So everybody needs to get in the discussion because it is so intertwined and complex, and we have an opportunity to do some meaningful push in the same way that we did with homeless veterans, where we now as a community, we talk about it every single week. We're talking about veterans' homelessness and how to sustain the system. We finally built the system. It ain't perfect, but it's a system that didn't exist before. We've got to do the same thing for you because it doesn't exist now. So I wanted to go, yay. Raj is taking on another challenge to herd all these regional cats. I mean, with lots of support, but we need more support in this fund.
I think that was the plug. Thank you for that. No, it is true. We need, what's that wise old adage, it takes a village, it takes the whole tribe to raise a child. It's true. We really do need to all hands on deck in all kinds of ways. And I think some people have this like, what am I going to do about it? Any of you can make a major impact on the issue of homelessness in our community by simply, one, leaving here tonight armed with all this information that you have now, being able to spread that word to others, but two, engaging in different ways, whether it's to join a COC or maybe come to that meeting, come to an organization like ours, volunteer to learn more. Street Teams is here. There's other great organizations who are doing a lot of things, and it's really important that I think one of the biggest pieces missing to the struggle is the fact that not enough people realize that youth homelessness is even an issue. Not enough people are youth homeless. That can't be. It's happening. It's happening. Just think about, I mean, I don't publicly talk about this a lot, but just think about, like, the wide variety of parents in our community. Just think about that. And how they're raising their kids and what can happen and how we can't control that. So there's all kinds of issues that kind of contribute to this and make it so complex. There's all kinds of ways to help, from mentoring, to volunteering, to advocating, to talking about it, to telling one of your friends that you think could be in a position to do something about it. Donating your used school supplies, going to a hotel room and being like, I'll take all that soap and hygiene and all this, I'm gonna go donate it to an organization, because that can be used to give to homeless youth and they can go take a shower in a non-traditional setting. But really quickly, I also want to talk about why it's so important. I mean, obviously we talked about all the reasons that is realized why, why this is happening, why it's so important to help youth, but I also want you guys to know from kind of like a policy and community perspective, what does it mean to help youth? What are those ramifications? It reduces our incarceration rates, less people in jail. It reduces the incidences of chronic adult homelessness, which is often has less likelihood of a successful intervention. It reduces chronic physical and mental illness that can be a barrier for them being employed, that can get drained through taxpayer dollars. Substance abuse, crime, unemployment, all these things affect the community. All these things prevent our community from raising the bar for every citizen equitably and becoming a better community, slowly but surely. In fact, we have a big disparity now between the homeless and others in our community that we really need to address. And if we do this right, what we do is we create productive, healthy adults who contribute to society, who vote, who go to work, who teach a soccer team, who give back to their community, whatever the case may be, as opposed to growing the population of chronic homeless adults. And Vince has a great little quote about that. Okay, well,
over. I presume you're talking about it, right? Yeah. Okay, well, we talk a little bit about like so much emphasis being put on homeless veterans, right? This is something we all can grasp and understand, but one thing that I think is important for everybody to understand is that if we allow these kids to live on the streets, we're going to be dealing with veterans of homelessness, kids who have lived on the streets, grew up on the streets, and all they know is the streets. And that, long-term, will be a very serious problem. So I think it's something that we all need to put a lot of emphasis on, because I know I know there's a lot of saying, we've ended, in a sense, veteran homelessness, but, and make no mistake about it, that is phenomenal news. But I think we all can kind of agree that children, without question, are our most precious resource. And we're failing these kids, quite frankly, collectively, not only as a community, but as a country. Failing because we have children living on the streets. And this is coming from a kid who was 11 years old and had to sleep in the Las Vegas Strip, not knowing where my parents were. I'm lucky to be where I'm at. I could have fallen in the same situation as a lot of the kids that I work with. We can't let this happen because a kid who's 11 years old has no business being on the street. So it's not something that we should just say, rah, rah, this is a problem. We should be discussing it, and we need to fix it. Period.
It's happening in all of our backyards. All of our backyards. Whether you live in Spanish Trails, Green Valley, North Las Vegas, anywhere in this community, it is happening.
Okay, I do have a question, because I know that we have some homeless vets and some homeless people who choose to live that way. For them, that is a lifestyle that they like. Okay, and someone needs to mention, do we know if there's actually children out there that they've chosen that way? I mean, I get it is wrong and all that, but
to your point, you'll always have those, I guess you could call them outliers, those people who maybe there's a mental health situation that's going on, maybe it's some PTSD, something, that will lead them to desire. Maybe it's the system hasn't worked for them. Maybe they've tried it. There's a lot of people, believe it or not, who've given it a try and it just didn't work out for them. So the streets then, in a sense, become their home. Yes, there's always going to be that. In fact, that's probably existed throughout history. Okay, that's there. But more often than not, that's not the case. Because, think about it conceptually, right? And wanting to be on the street is almost, counterintuitive, I guess you could say, because everything about the streets is not really.
Well, but okay, for people like myself, and all that, but like you said, okay, there are some people that choose to live this way, and that.
Think about it though. Why though? Why? Yeah. It's not necessarily a choice. Aside from the ones that Chris is talking about, mental health, those suffering from PTSD, etc. It's often a circumstance where they become hardened into that environment because they couldn't get help, they couldn't get resources, they wanted to escape that situation. I don't think any adult or child, especially, when they go down that downward cycle, want to stay down there.
Well, I know, but I know that there are some,
But thousands of years of evolution, this is my husband's going to steal it. Thousands of years of evolution, people will choose the path of least resistance. So he always says, what are we doing wrong that that's their best option?
Right.
What are we doing as a society? If children are choosing out there than in there or in with their resources.
And I think also, kind of related to what you were saying and what Vince is saying, obviously this is absolutely a moral issue, this is an ethics issue, but it's also an economic issue, right? And for people interested in numbers and all of that what Arash is saying, getting youth off the streets prevents all of these cost burdens to our society. We internally did a preliminary return on investment study just for some of our own programs. On average, every dollar that NPHY spends on a homeless youth results in savings of over $14 to society, because we are preventing these things that are so much more expensive down the line, because it's so much more successful to intervene when a youth is 15 years old and they're still young and they're still resilient and they're still so capable of learning new things and open to learning new things and forming new habits, than when someone like Vince said becomes a veteran of homelessness and they're 40 years old and they've been on the streets for 15 years and this is the way that they live and the way that that's their habit now, and that's how they want to stay. It's proven that interventions when youth are young are much more successful, and then they have a much longer return on that, right, through the rest of their life when they can now be productive, involved citizens and all of that. So it's really, really important, and it's not only so important morally to not allow children to experience this, but it's really important for the health of our overall community to be able to save this money and change our resources so that they're really being used in the most effective, efficient way, and not, in a way down the line that may not be as effective.
And that's why it's a business issue, a community issue, a policy issue. In fact, a well-run transitional housing program for youth, on average in the nation, these are rough numbers, but 12 to 15 grand, let's say, a year per child. The cost of what's the middle one? The foster care group home. The cost of a foster care group home is on average about $25,000 to $50,000 annually per child, and the cost of incarcerating a child is anywhere from 75 plus. So there's a much more effective intervention to deal with these youth through transitional programs when we realize that the problem is that they are homeless youth, not that they are a criminal all of a sudden because they stole a Twinkie and became arrested, and all of a sudden they're now having to go to the juvenile place, and court's times are taken up, and judges' times are taken up, and we could be fighting more real crime and other things. So it is a true drain to society in so many ways it's kind of an epidemic, it's a plague.
It's also really what you brought up about the idea of prisons and all that stuff. It's really, really sad. I actually just sat in on a focus group we had the other day, and a youth in the focus group said, and he actually, it was his first day at NHY, he just got there, he was a drop-in center client, he'd been homeless for a while, traveling around different states, like you had said, and he said, it's really, really sad when the only way that I know for sure I can get a bed and a meal is if I just go get arrested on purpose. And he said that. He said, the only way I know that I can depend on getting a bed and a meal is to get arrested and go to jail. And that's really what's wrong with our society when the only way youth knows they can get those resources is by being incarcerated. And he said, why don't I know that if I, get in a situation where I need a bed, that there's something else I can do in order to be guaranteed that that's absolutely going to happen for me. It's really, I think really puts that in perspective of how can we shift our thinking in our community so that's not the case.
Who in here has social media account sometime? Okay. Somebody give me a number, how many friends, followers, whatever. How many do you have on your page? Anybody? Almost 300. 300? Yeah. How many do you have? Mom and daughter? How many?
Probably 250.
Okay. How many like you guys?
MPHY or personally?
No, personally.
Personally, like 700 probably. 700.
600.
How many?
1,200?
A couple
Oh,
So almost probably we've got at least safe to say if we went around the room we'd have close to at least 4,000 if not more friends represented in here. So if you all go home and post about what you learned or share, hey, there's this great organization and this phone number is safe place, all those people, if they learn and if they share with their friends, and I suck at math, but I know that's a lot of people. So just to throw that out there, you could go home and do that too, and that would help them get the word out there.
And that is.
And you guys have a Facebook, and what's your social media?
Yeah,
Hey, so our Facebook is just Nevada Partnership for Homeless Youth. So if you just facebook.com/ I know it's kind of long, but Nevada Partnership for Homeless Youth. We have a Twitter, we have an Instagram, those are NB Homeless Youth. Check us out, we're really active on social media. We post interesting news stories and thank you, all the time. So feel free to like us and share our statuses, and that's so true. I mean, that is the, simplest form of advocacy, just to share information. So
That's how I got what I did.
And
It's just because I liked your
that's awesome.
And I was like, cool, I want to go.
And I want you guys to think about the responsibility that lies within each one of us. Homeless youth don't have a voice. They're not taxpayers. They're not voters. They're not veterans yet. They don't have a voice. There's no one actually fighting for them. If you think about it, your biggest advocates are your parents. If your parents neglected you, abandoned you, or they're no longer in your life, who is your biggest advocate? We all as a community need to advocate for this group of population because of Vince's point. It is criminal that there are 11-year-olds, 12-year-olds, 13-year-olds, whatever the kids may be, just sleeping on the strip with no one caring if they're home or not. And I'm pretty sure that none of us could sleep if we met someone actually face-to-face tell those 11s, and yeah, I'm gonna go street tonight under the MGM because that's the best I got. It's criminal, and our policymakers aren't making a big enough deal about it yet because they're not voters, they're not taxpayers, they're not someone's problem, nor are they a constituency or base that can be pandered to by anyone. So it's up to us. It is really up to us. I know that's why Melissa and Vincent are in NHY. I know that's why I'm in NHY. And Meredith, I know that's why you're fighting the struggle, street teams. And now all of you are soldiers now in this fight. We're combating a plague in our community, and that plague is youth homelessness. And it has dire consequences. I don't care what you care about. Whether it's just a simple altruistic reason, whether you care about family, whether you care about your business, whether you care about policy, the community, whatever the case may be, this issue should be near and dear to your heart. To Meredith's point, spreading the word is one of the most effective ways that we can get the word out there. Because once we get that word out there, and enough people are crying about it, and talking about it, then policymakers will pay attention. And then when policymakers can pay attention, then we can finally get some laws passed that will help these youth. We can get some policy reformation, and more importantly, we can get more resources. More resources. The state of Nevada gives more resources. I don't even talk about it, but I think that pets and certain type of things get more money than children in this state. That's a crime, in my opinion. It's a moral crime.
There are more pet shelters in these shelters.
Yes, yes. So if there are more pet shelters and your shelters in the state of Nevada, what does that tell you about our priorities as a community? What does it tell you about our knowledge about this issue? So these are some things I really want us to think about. I really thank you for there's not many people listening to Friday night when about this issue in the community. But this is how we started a movement. And NHY and BRAZENconversations and Meredith and many other organizations, we're trying to start a movement around this issue because it's a movement that will help solve it. Yes?
Now we're in the backpack too. Now we are in the backpack too.
Yes, now you guys are all in the backpack as well. So yeah, please be on this information. Please spread the word. To Meredith's point, please either visit our website or social media, get more information out. Please come learn about our continuum care board that meets. There's application forms and interest forms back there as well. There's information about our organization as well. Does anyone have any other questions or anything that they want to bring up or talk about? We could talk about this for days. So,
how often does this, the board, meet?
which one?
Once a month.
The continuum care board? Once a
Yes,
month?
yeah, it's once a month. But there are lots of opportunities for working groups.
For you?
That will meet depending on when the members of those working groups want to meet. Yeah.
All right then. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all for coming.